About 9 o'clock, he and Judge Davis and the friends go to the telegraph office to hear the returns coming in.
He wrote a letter to a friend that he was worried he might be lynched. Whenever Lincoln comes in anywhere, everybody comes out to see him.
What if a single photograph could rewrite everything we think we know about American history? April 1865. Abraham Lincoln is days from death, the Civil War is ending, and history is hiding a secret. In 2019, Margaret Ellison opens a cedar trunk in a Pennsylvania attic and finds a glass plate photograph, impossible, full color, showing Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, and a man who was never supposed to exist.
157 years after the Civil War ended.
General Ulysses S. Grant had been consigned to history.
Who was he? Why was he erased? 7 words stitched into his uniform point to the night Lincoln died, April 14, 1865. What she found doesn't just raise questions, it threatens to rewrite history itself. Lincoln's hidden watchman. The trunk itself was cedar, lined with tin, the kind of construction that was built to last, airtight when sealed, resistant to moisture and insects, and the kind of box someone builds when they intend something to survive centuries. Margaret Ellison described the smell when she opened it as cedar and something else underneath. Chemical, sharp, the ghost of a darkroom process she couldn't name. The wax paper wrapping was meticulous, layered 3 times. The glass plate inside was cushioned against a piece of cut velvet that had faded from what was likely deep red to a dusty pink. Whoever packed this photograph understood preservation. They understood that they were protecting something that needed to outlast them by a very long time. The plate itself measured approximately 8 by 10 inches, standard for the period in terms of dimensions. Nothing else about it was standard. Margaret photographed it with her phone, sent the image to her daughter, and then called a friend who worked in archival preservation at Gettysburg College. That friend drove out the following morning. His name is Dr. Paul Wetzel, and he has spent 30 years working with Civil War-era photographic materials. He has handled thousands of daguerreotypes.
Today, only a handful of specialists create daguerreotypes,
Ambrotypes, and albumen prints. He has seen hand-tinted portraits and early experiments in chromogenic chemistry. He told Margaret, before he even lifted the plate to the light, that full color from 1865 was almost certainly a misidentification, that her eyes were playing tricks, that the wax paper might have created a yellowing effect that, when removed, would reveal the expected monochrome image beneath. He lifted it to the light. He did not speak for almost a full minute. The color was not incidental. It was not a trick of the window or an artifact of the glass. Lincoln's frock coat was black with the slight greenish undertone that black wool develops under particular lighting conditions. Grant's coat was Union blue, not gray blue, not slate, but the specific almost indigo blue of a field officer's dress uniform. The grass visible at the bottom edge of the frame was green. The white portico columns behind the 3 men were precisely, unmistakably white. Dr. Wetzel later said in an interview that his first instinct was forgery, modern forgery, the kind of elaborate historical fraud that occasionally surfaces in auction houses and estate sales. He sent samples from the plate's edges, carefully extracted, preserving the image, to 2 independent laboratories, one at the Smithsonian's Museum Conservation Institute and one at a private materials analysis firm in Philadelphia. Both labs returned the same conclusion. The plate was genuine. The chemical composition of the photographic emulsion dated the materials to between 1860 and 1870. There was no evidence of modern photographic processes, no digital manipulation, no film-based photography. The image was produced using a process that, according to both labs, should not have been capable of producing color at the fidelity they were observing. One of the Smithsonian researchers, Dr. Anita Barrero, wrote in her preliminary findings, The chromogenic elements present in the emulsion suggest an experimental process consistent with early color theory research being conducted in Europe during this period, most notably the work of Louis Ducos du Oron in France. However, du Oron's first documented successful color photograph dates to 1877. What we are examining appears to predate that achievement by more than a decade. Predate it by more than a decade. So the photograph exists. The photograph is real, the chemistry is authentic, and what it shows is three men standing together in what appears to be late afternoon light, the long shadows of a sun going down, days possibly, before the world changes forever. Two of those men are the most documented humans of the 19th century. The third has no name. And that is where this story becomes something else entirely. The man who vanished. Look at him carefully. He stands between Lincoln and Grant with a posture that is neither casual nor stiff. He is not an aide holding papers. See, he is not a photographer's assistant caught at the edge of a frame. He is centered, deliberate. His shoulders are squared, his chin slightly raised, and both Lincoln and Grant appear to be angled almost imperceptibly toward him. The subtle body language of men who regard someone as significant. He is younger than both of them, mid-30s perhaps. Dark hair cut close, a jaw that is strong without being remarkable. His eyes, and this is something several researchers have commented on independently, his eyes are looking directly into the camera with an expression that is almost impossible to categorize. Not pride, not fear, something closer to resignation. The look of a man who knows something is coming and has made his peace with it. His uniform is Union. The cut and construction are correct for the period, but the insignia on his collar and the configuration of buttons on his chest do not match any documented regiment, division, or special unit in the Army of the Potomac or any other Union command. Dr. Rebecca Howell, a military historian at the University of Virginia who was brought in to analyze the image, spent 3 weeks cross-referencing the insignia against every known Union uniform catalog from the period. She found nothing. "It's not a rank I can place," she said. "It's not a unit I can identify. The design of the collar device is unlike anything in the standard issue or the dress uniform catalogs. Either this man belonged to a unit so classified that its uniforms were never cataloged, which is theoretically possible for certain War Department operations, or the insignia was custom. It's fabricated for a purpose we don't fully understand yet." Then Margaret Ellison's daughter made a discovery that shifted everything. She had been digitally scanning old family photographs, the ordinary ones, the ones that had been in albums and shoeboxes for generations, as part of an effort to preserve the family archive after her great-grandfather's death. And in a photograph taken around 1902, a group portrait of men standing outside what appears to be a veterans' hall in Chambersburg, she noticed a face. An older face, gray at the temples, heavier through the jaw, but carrying the same strong bone structure, the same direct quality in the eyes, the same man. She brought the two images to Dr. Wetzel. He brought in a forensic facial recognition specialist. The analysis was not definitive. The 1902 photograph was lower quality, at the angle slightly different. But the specialist's assessment was that the probability of a match was significant, high enough to pursue. The family's oral history, fragmented and passed down in the way that working-class families pass things down, in pieces, in half-sentences, in things nobody thought to ask about until the person who knew was gone, contained a single recurring reference, a name, Donovan. No first name preserved, just Donovan. A man described by Margaret's grandfather in the one recorded conversation anyone had thought to transcribe as the one who kept his promise by keeping quiet. Military records for anyone named Donovan in Union service are not unusual. It was a common Irish surname, and Irish immigrants comprised a significant portion of the Union Army. But when researchers began cross-referencing Donovan's, who had served near the Washington command structure in early 1865, something strange emerged. Several records had gaps. Not the ordinary gaps of lost paperwork and administrative chaos. Structured gaps. Places where a name had clearly existed and been removed. Enlistment rolls where a line had been deliberately inked out. A pension application file at the National Archives where the applicant's name had been cut, physically cut.
Some days you're looking at them, it's just a file.
From the top of the document, but the body of the application remained, referencing service in a special capacity directly under War Department authority. Someone had worked very hard to make one man disappear. The question was not who he was anymore. The question was why they needed him gone. To Lincoln's hidden network. Here is something historians acknowledge, but rarely emphasize. Abraham Lincoln received more documented death threats than any American president before or since. Hundreds, possibly thousands. The threats began before he even reached Washington for his first inauguration. The Baltimore Plot of 1861. A documented assassination conspiracy that forced Lincoln to travel to the Capitol in disguise on a secret night train surrounded by a small group of men that Allan Pinkerton had assembled specifically for his protection. Lincoln knew he was a target. He had always known. And while he famously resisted heavy security, refusing to let fear change his accessibility to ordinary citizens, walking to the War Department telegraph office at night with minimal escort, but attending public events that any serious security professional would have considered reckless, there is evidence, buried in War Department correspondence, that he was not entirely without a hidden structure of protection. A memo dated March 1865, discovered in 2021 in a collection of documents purchased at a private estate auction in Maryland and later donated to the Library of Congress, references what its author, a War Department official whose signature is partially illegible, describes as the verified outer ring. The memo is brief. It does not explain what the outer ring is. It does not list names, but it uses language that suggests an established operation. Continued placement, verified positions, standing instruction. Dr. Harold Fenn, a Lincoln scholar at Georgetown University, reviewed the memo and connected it to two other War Department documents from the same period that had been cataloged but largely unexamined. Together, the three documents suggest the existence of a small, unofficial unit, not the formal military guard, not the metropolitan police detail that accompanied Lincoln, but something operating parallel to both. Men placed in positions that the visible security apparatus did not cover, an outer ring. Whether Donovan was part of this structure is not confirmed, but the stitching tells its own story. When the uniform of the man in the photograph was examined, not the photograph, but an actual artifact recovered from the trunk beneath the glass plate, a folded piece of uniform fabric that had been separately wrapped and preserved, researchers found it. The hidden inside the lining of the left breast panel, stitched in thread so fine it required magnification to read, was a phrase in 7 words. Target verified. Stand until April 14th. Sit with that for a moment. April 14th, the night Lincoln was shot. The phrase is operational in its language. It is not personal, it is not sentimental. It is the language of instruction, of a mission parameter. Target could mean Lincoln. It could mean a threat. Stand almost certainly means maintain position. And the date, April 14th, 1865, is not a coincidence. It is not a date you write into a uniform lining as anything other than a deadline. Dr. Fenn's interpretation, offered carefully and with appropriate academic caution, is that someone gave Donovan an assignment with a specific endpoint. Stand, protect, until this date. And the implication being that April 14th was understood, by whoever gave the order, as a significant moment, a culmination. The question that nobody can answer cleanly is whether that foreknowledge was protective or something darker. Was Donovan tasked with protecting Lincoln until the 14th because that was the end of a specific threat window? Or was the 14th significant because someone in the chain of knowledge understood that Lincoln's protection would either succeed or fail on that precise night? We cannot know for certain what happened at Ford's Theater with Donovan present or absent. We cannot place him in the building. We cannot place him outside it. What we know is that the mission ended on April 14th. And so did Lincoln, the president's secret commission. Let's go back to the photograph itself, because the question of how it exists is inseparable from the question of why it was made. Color photography in 1865 was not a public technology. It was barely even a theoretical one. The scientific principles behind it, the idea that any color could be decomposed into primary components, captured separately and recombined, had been articulated by James Clerk Maxwell as early as 1855. But articulating a principle and building a working process are separated by years of chemistry, failure, and accident. The experimental color work being done in the 1860s in France and England was not available commercially. It was not available to American photographers. It existed in private laboratories and in the notebooks of researchers who were still years from a result they could reliably reproduce. So how does a color photograph, chemically authenticated, materials dated to the 1860s, exist in a Pennsylvania farmhouse trunk? The Smithsonian's Dr. Barrero proposed the most compelling explanation in her published analysis. She noted that the emulsion chemistry of the Ellison plate is consistent with a process that combined elements of early Lippmann photography, which used light interference to record color, with a separate chromogenic sensitizer that does not match any documented European process of the period. Her conclusion was that the plate was either produced by a European researcher working in the United States, or by an American experimenter whose work was never documented because it was conducted privately, under commission, a private commission. And Lincoln was known to be interested in photography in ways that were unusual for a head of state. He was one of the most photographed men of his era, by Matthew Brady, by Alexander Gardner, by dozens of others. He understood the power of images. He understood that photographs were how ordinary Americans would know him, would remember him, would carry his face forward into a future he could not predict or control. Gardner, who was Lincoln's most trusted photographer, kept detailed records of his sessions with the president. None of those records reference a color experiment. But several researchers have noted that Gardner's relationship with Lincoln involved a degree of personal trust that went beyond professional engagement, and that Gardner was not the only photographer with access to the White House in 1865. And the possibility that Lincoln commissioned a color photograph in the final weeks of his life, knowing, with the particular fatalistic clarity that he had demonstrated in dreams he recorded and conversations he had with close associates, that his time might be short, is not difficult to accept emotionally. A president who knew what he had meant to the country, a president who understood legacy, choosing to leave behind an image that was technically impossible. That would last. That would eventually be found. A time capsule. Not for the public, for a family, for a descendant who would one day pull a trunk from beneath a floorboard and hold a piece of glass up to the light. The photograph was not meant for history. It was meant for Donovan's people. It was proof that he existed. The letter signed, Al in the trunk. Beneath the glass plate and the folded uniform fragment, beneath a layer of cedar shavings that had kept the moisture at bay for a century and a half, was a letter, single page, written in ink that had faded to brown but remained fully legible. The handwriting was careful, not hurried, not the handwriting of a man writing in a moment of crisis, but deliberate, like someone choosing each word with full awareness of its weight. Margaret Ellison read it alone in the attic, before she called anyone. She said later that she cried before she reached the second paragraph. The letter does not identify its recipient by name. It begins with, "My friend," and it proceeds in a register that is startlingly informal for the period, intimate even. There are no grand declarations, no patriotic flourishes, and the voice in the letter is tired and warm and fully human in a way that the Lincoln of statues and speeches and history textbooks almost never manages to be. He writes about the war as something he carries inside his body. He writes about the faces he has not been able to forget. He writes that he believes the country will survive what it has been through, but that survival and healing are different things, and the healing will take longer than anyone wants to admit. And then he writes this: "You have stood where they did not expect you to stand, and you have done it without any reward I was able to give you openly. History will not know you were there. I am sorry for that. I believe it is necessary. I believe you understand why, better perhaps than I do. Stand where they don't expect you. That instruction I give to no other man. Stand where they don't expect you." The same language as the stitching. The letter is signed in a signature smaller and more restrained than the public Lincoln signature, with a single abbreviated name. Alien graphological analysis of the signature was conducted by 2 independent experts. Both assessed it as consistent with Lincoln's known handwriting. Neither could offer a definitive authentication based on a signature alone, and both acknowledged the limitations of their analysis. But the internal consistency of the letter, the specific phrases, the emotional register, the historical references embedded in passages not quoted here, led several Lincoln scholars who reviewed it to describe it as something they could not easily dismiss. Dismiss or not, what the letter does is answer the question that the photograph raises. Why would a man allow himself to be erased from history? Donovan made a choice, not a coerced one, or at least the evidence does not suggest coercion. He made the choice of a man who believed that his disappearance was part of the mission, that the outer ring only worked if it remained invisible, that the value of what he had done was, in some fundamental way, dependent on no one ever knowing he had done it. The burden of that silence is almost unimaginable. He came home from the war, the 1902 photograph confirms that much or strongly suggests it, and he said nothing. He became a face in a Veterans Hall portrait. He grew old in Pennsylvania. He told no one except perhaps the person he trusted most, in the most private moment. Oh, and even then only enough to pass down a name. Just Donovan. And a phrase. The one who kept his promise by keeping quiet. He built a trunk. He lined it with cedar and tin. He wrapped a glass plate in 3 layers of wax paper and laid it against velvet. He folded a piece of uniform fabric around 7 words stitched in thread finer than human hair. He placed a letter inside, written by the man he served, the man who died while Donovan was somewhere in the dark doing something history would never record. And he sealed it, not to protect himself, to protect the truth, until the right moment, until someone in his bloodline was ready to find it. Donovan kept his silence, but the evidence he left behind refuses to stay buried. The photograph, the letter, the stitched words, they are all fragments of a story history tried to erase, and pieces of a truth that may have been too dangerous, too human, too real. And now, a century and a half later, we are the witnesses. But if one man could vanish from the record while shaping the fate of a nation, how many others remain hidden, waiting in attics, trunks, or shadows, their stories unclaimed? What else is out there, quietly shaping history while the world looks the other way?